For home leagues, we're going to have to get the message out there that if you took Alexander Madison in the 6th round last year, then you need to know Zamir White is right here wearing his Alexander Madison t-shirt. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. You welcome to the show. This isn't your show. What is this? Are you taking over late round perspectives?
I can host if you would like to step back for a change, since you have a lot going on now. You're becoming a best ball bro. You're having candid conversations. That's more my lane. Just talk about life on fantasy football. But look at you. You're expanding.
I'm trying to, man. You know, people need their hour-long plus shows in the podcast feed. You know, I've been doing the 20-minute shows for so long. It's nice to change things up a little bit.
Never forget that I'm the one who texted you couple years ago asking why aren't you doing more video, and here you are now adding a plethora of video, probably too much, honestly.
Look, whenever I went out on my own, there were people emailing me and they're like, hey, you know that you could be on YouTube too. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. Like, I get that. I can only
it exists.
Yeah. I can only do so much, running the show on my own. But yeah, I mean, now that I've got some help from my co-host Rich Ryan, who's helping me with becoming a best ball bro. He does a lot of the video editing for the YouTube channel as well. And now that I have a format like this, where it's a lot more conducive for YouTube, the late round podcast, what people don't fully get and grasp is it's just really difficult to sort of transfer that from being the podcast that it is and then putting it up on YouTube, especially in season, because in season, to get that show out at 6 a.m. every, Tuesday through Friday, to get out at 6 a.m., I'm re-recording things based on especially because there's news that happens during the week, but especially 15 transactions I do after, or I do on Monday for Tuesday, but then there's a Monday night game that happens, right? And so I'd have to re-record stuff and redo the video. At least with something like this, it's a lot easier to get out. And if there's some information that changes from a Thursday to Friday, which isn't usually that frequent, and I also just openly tell people that we're recording it on a Thursday, so the Thursday night game might influence some things. But that's the main reason why the actual legacy late round podcast hasn't gone on YouTube in that same way.
Our job confuses probably everyone in our lives, so much so that I no longer even try to explain what we do. But I think the most confused everyone is all the time is based on the schedule you just said, because everyone can't even comprehend that I literally can't attend football games. It's not even not that I want to, but it's not even in the realm of possibilities if I wanted to, because my job is to hard life, I know, but to sit on the couch, take notes, and watch football. It's not possible. So yes, like you, from Sunday to Thursday morning, it pretty much is where I just cannot breathe at all. Yeah,
right. In season is just a different beast. I mean, right now, I've been going nuts just because of the draft guide. So, but that's only a brief period. It's a 3-4 week period where there's just a ton of work in June for me. And part of that is just procrastination to some degree too. But in season, I'm always shocked whenever I see a fellow fantasy analyst going to games. I'm like, how are you doing that? What is your content schedule early week? Because everyone, we need a sweeping change in the fantasy space. I know that this happens in a lot of leagues where waivers are Wednesday or Thursday as opposed to, are on Thursday as opposed to Tuesday to Wednesday, right? And a lot of the default platforms that people use in the big platforms like an ESPN and a Yahoo, a lot of those waivers run on Tuesday night. And so it forces us as analysts. I know that we're pseudo complaining, right? We're not actually complaining about this being
walking
our job,
the fine line.
Yeah, right. I mean, this isn't a real complaint, but it does truncate your week in a way to make sure that you got to get everything that happened that previous week essentially done on Monday and Tuesday, because people need that information for their waivers that are going to run on Tuesday. And then, you get that Wednesday day where people are still going to be running waivers, but you start to transition a little bit more into the following week. But yeah, that's just how it goes with the weekly cycle that we run.
You'll appreciate this quick Hill story. And that is that the one time a couple years ago, I got to get away. Week 17, and as everyone knows, week 18, a little more brief in content, still same quality, but brief just because we have no idea who is going to play. And so I happened to be in Cincinnati visiting a friend, And he had friends at ESPN who gave us tickets to a football game. And I thought, week 17, prime time, I can go to this football game. Like, I actually have less work, more so than throughout the regular season, throughout the year. And that game, if you haven't picked up just yet, was the Bills at Bengals, primetime football, the Damar Hamlin game. And I have not been to a live football game since. I think I'm still haunted to this day.
Yeah, you probably should just stop going to football games if that's
correct.
And going out on that game would be epic in a bad way, but still like, a monumental, huge moment that we can fortunately look back on and say that Damar Hamlin's, okay. But that's a crazy game to be at as you're like, because I used to go to NFL games all the time. Mm-hmm. Like I went growing up to tons and tons of Steelers games. I haven't been able to go to a ton here in Charlotte, only mostly like early season or like preseason games and stuff.
Not that
like
you want to either right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't really want to support Tepper either at this point, right? But yeah, I mean, like it's really strange how my football viewing has really shifted, like live football viewing has really shifted to college, which I'm not as passionate about in terms of just the sport, but I'm a big Pitt fan, obviously being a Pitt grad. And so I was able to go to the ACC championship when Kenny Pickett had the fake slide and stuff like that. Like I'm able to at least go to some of those events. But yeah, the NFL live stuff, man, that's just not part of my life anymore.
I applaud you for hanging on to somewhat of being a fan of the Steelers, because throughout the years, doing this like you at a lesser spectrum for, over a decade now, I've just lost my passion for the Cowboys growing up. Now I genuinely just cheer for players to get paid. Like the running back conversations, don't care. I don't participate at all. I'm just happy when someone gets paid.
I honestly, like, you and I have been friends for a really long time. I think it's the first time I realized that you were a Cowboys fan, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even realize.
Usually the accent makes people assume that I'm a Cowboys fan. I grew up with them, obviously, being from the area, but no, not anymore, man. There is admittedly a little childlike joy whenever they're good, but newsflash, they haven't been good in 30 years, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, look, for the record, like back in my late teens, I've talked about this on shows before, but like back in my late teens, a Steelers loss would literally ruin my week, right?
Yeah.
It was over. Like and fortunately they were pretty good throughout my childhood and into my adult life and stuff like that. You just naturally, doing this for a living, you just appreciate other teams, you appreciate the game more. Like I love what the Ravens do, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. Like if 17-year-old JJ were to say that, he'd be it'd be shocking. Or if he were to hear me say that, he'd be slapping me right now, right? But I appreciate Lamar Jackson. I appreciate John Harbaugh. I appreciate, what that team, how that team has built itself and really sort of changed the game in a way. And so, it's just hard to latch on to. Maybe it's maturity too. Maybe that's part of it too. You just grow up and you don't have to be a laundry bro anymore as much. But at the same time, I'm pretty passionate about the Penguins. So I guess it's not just about maturity,
But in maturing, that's why it's also odd when people get upset about us for doing our job and judging their team, critiquing their team. Mm-hmm. Our job would be better if every team was good. It would be amazing if we had 32 Mike McDaniel offenses on the field every week. There would be no downside to this, but instead we get Arthur Smith and some others every week instead.
Yeah. All right, we got to dig into the actual show here and the actual show sheet instead of just talking about whatever the heck we want to talk about. But I have a feeling that this is one of those shows, because you and I are buddies, that we might go longer than a standard perspective show, but we'll see how this all goes down. By the way, you're the second person in about a month and a half, because we had what does D-Bro refer himself to in regards to you? What is the
ugly John Daigle, which that would assume that John Daigle thinks he's attractive, but that's not the case at all. So I'm not sure where he gets that from outside of the expo and everyone walking up to him because we are bald and bearded and just having the bias that he was John Daigle. When oddly enough, and maybe it's I don't have a single tattoo, let alone an awesome tattoo sleeve like D-Bro does.
Yeah.
But I never got compared to Derek Brown one time.
Yeah. So D-Bro brought up the infamous carpool ride from last expo.
Yeah.
Where you, Mr. Daigle, you were feeling it in the car, but also you were probably the number one screamer at the ambiance in the mess that was going on in that car, for the record.
I'm also the only one in the car, I believe, that doesn't have children.
Right.
And so it's easier for me to nitpick the mess. Plus, since I am, especially, when I'm feeling myself, I am admittedly a little bit of an antagonizer still.
Sure.
I used to be a lot worse, but it's calmed down, as you said, as we've matured, as we've gotten older. Yeah. But understanding your situation, that you'd literally done a cross country trip previously with kids in the back as well, it just seemed like a perfect time to make fun of my friends, as I'll do. So that's all it was.
Look, you got to rib me a little bit for it. It was funny. But let's talk about you as an analyst in the space. Like you said, you've been around for a while. How would you describe yourself as an analyst? Whenever I ask this, it's usually like, are you more of a film bro, or are you more of an analytics nerd? Like, which side do you land on? But I'll leave it a little bit more even open-ended than that. How would you describe yourself as a fantasy football analyst?
And you already mentioned that we have a show sheet, so that's not news to anyone. During the offseason, the show sheets definitely work out better because the topics can go anywhere. Regular season, you catch me on a show after Wednesday, I'm prepared for anything you ask because all my notes are done by then. But admittedly, the football, even in the offseason, writes itself at this time of the year. The topics about personal life is where it gets a little tougher for me, especially as someone who is in therapy to love myself. To find new ways to like myself. So answering a question about myself is super tough, especially as someone who doesn't accept compliments well. But I think I'm more of a data person. I pride myself on being able to dumb down the data. I don't have models like you. I have some models, but I also don't always say the sentence, my model. But I find ways to dumb down is the easier way to say it, to communicate it easier, just because I see all the numbers. I'm aware of EPA and all of this stuff. I use it for betting. I use it for DFS. I use it for everything. But still, our job is to communicate that all in a way that everyone can not only understand it, but it's entertaining at the end of the day. So I think I pride myself in being the everyday person who looks at all the stats behind the scenes, but can also go into a bar and just have a regular conversation with you.
Yeah, look, we need good communicators in the space for sure. I think one of the big problems with especially the data versus film, it's like the whole argument and all of that is really, really dumb because it's should be hand in hand. It should be a thing that
there is no skeleton key.
Yeah, right. There shouldn't be this separation. It's just a very easy way to sort of dissect the two groups, right? And sort of group them up together. I think part of the problem and why a film person might hate on a data person and vice versa is because of communication, is because data people will often come about things in a way where they are acting like they're on their high horse, but they don't realize that they're totally acting in that way. I'm sure I've done it in the past, and it's not intentional by any means. And then film people are the same way, they'll throw out these random comments of well, your box score is not going to show this and stuff like that. And without necessarily fully understanding and seeing the greater picture. And so I do think that it's important to have, good communicators like yourself just within the space in general.
And DFS and best ball have definitely opened up those conversations a little bit, I think, because although I am more evidence-based, and I usually get that from the data, also I understand probabilities within the data. And so now for best ball especially, we'll talk about some players where I have leans, but I'll still flatten my exposure and get it everywhere because I understand that still a 10-20% outcome means that outcome could happen. And that's really, I think, brought us a little bit closer.
Yeah, no doubt. Speaking of best ball, right now over on Underdog, we're seeing drafts go a certain way pretty frequently, which is lots of wide receivers early. I mean, if someone that has never played best ball and has only been playing season long walked into an Underdog room, they would be shocked when they see some of these wide receivers let's say Keenan Allen, Hollywood Brown, Terry McLaurin, that tier going ahead oftentimes of the RB10 in drafts, right? We're talking guys in the wide receiver 35 to 40 range, often going ahead of top 10 running backs, which is not something that we ever see in a typical season long draft. Now, with that being said, we're going and we are already approaching and getting very close to, season long draft season, if you will, in home league season and people drafting, in their office leagues. And my question to you is, what do you think is going to be sort of the biggest difference between those two formats? And how do you think we, as, if you're listening to this episode right now, if you've been drafting best ball drafts, you're a more hardcore player, right? We, as more hardcore players, how can we sort of exploit that in our home leagues, in our office leagues?
I've always labeled it underdog best ball, because if you play best ball anywhere else, and you shouldn't, but if you play anywhere else, you realize that it's a totally different game, as you mentioned. And honestly, to answer your question, we knew we were always going to reach this point. I wasn't sure when, but with best ball intensifying every year, we were always headed down the path of the best ball bros setting post NFL draft ADP. And that's arguably never been more true than this season. If you look at current redraft ADP from the major host sites, ESPN, Yahoo, etc., wherever you play, there are player landmines everywhere, right? Saquon Barkley being, I dub him as last year's Josh Jacobs for being the most obvious red flag in the first round. And there's lots of other more micro takes there. But Underdog, in particular, has created this game in half PPR, oddly enough, where everyone is then racing, as you said, to grab 4 wide receivers within the first 6-7 rounds. And that's not going to be the case at all in home leagues. Everyone is going to pile on the big money contract RBs like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, the list goes on. So it's going to open the door for more, in my opinion, immaculate running back builds, like immaculate anchor and hero RB strategies, whether it's one of the big 3 you start with and Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, or if you're just waiting until the 2nd, 3rd round turn, opening your draft with just one running back to lean on between Devon Achane and Kyron Williams. I don't even hate Derrick Henry, honestly, just because the structure of the Ravens offense, although we love Lamar Jackson, they keep saying they're going to pass more. It's never going to change with that type of player. We have, 7 years of evidence now to show that. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes from best ball to home leagues when everyone opens up. It's just going to be the fact that we are piling on wide receivers and Underdog, but those options of wide receivers are actually going to be much more stronger, because I think we're going to get 2nd and 3rd round guys, and even the 4th and 5th round potentially in home leagues.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things where it's very, like, I think part of the reason why the running back dead zone exists every year is not just so much that those players, those like mid to low end RB2s just naturally bust. It's also from an opportunity cost standpoint, people panic, right? It's that when these like bell cow backs, and let's just throw Derrick Henry in there, when you get those like top 8 or 9 guys and they dry up and there's no one else there, then people start forcing the issue because they know that they need to fulfill that lineup requirement of getting that other running back. And oftentimes they're then reaching for that player, right? I think that there's some guys who could go in either direction this year when you get into like the low end RB1 range, maybe even into the high end RB2 range. But to me, there's like, a guy like Ramondre Stevenson, a guy like Zamir White, like those are players. And it would be great if you even disagreed with me later whenever we talk about some players. But, those types of players seem like at surface level, seem like dead zone type running backs. And they're naturally going to get drafted higher in home leagues where the opportunity cost then becomes a lot greater. And so I think going from Underdog to these season-long leagues, it's very, very important to practice patience at the running back position in particular, where, you're going to feel this need because you're so used to like Najee Harris going in round 8 or 9, right? After doing drafts on Underdog, he's probably going to be like a 4th round pick once, he was like a 3rd rounder, let's say last year. He's probably going to be like a 4th, maybe 5th, maybe 6th in some leagues type pick, where you're going to feel this need that you need to get him because things are drying up. But I do think that maybe a more 0 RB build in certain formats, of course, if it's a standard league or something like that, or you're only needing to start 2 wide receivers, what have you, it's a little bit different. But I do think that it's going to force the masses to accept, you said anchor RB, which I think hero RB, anchor RB is an approach that's timeless. Like, it's going to work almost every single year, regardless of the environment, regardless of the market. 0 RB, you could argue that too, to some degree. I just think that there are years and situations and leagues where it's just a lot easier to go 0 RB. And I think people, the general consensus is what I'm talking to here. It's not even necessarily the people listening to this right now, but I'm talking about, your neighbor who just starts looking at fantasy football stuff in August. That neighbor might end up being a little bit more accepting of 0 RB because of these dynamics that we're talking about, going from best ball to redraft or to season long, because I think naturally there's going to be some stuff from these best ball leagues that start to seep into and transfer over into season long a little bit more.
You mentioned ambiguous backfields. That's a huge one because not only do a lot of these backfields have new coaching changes as well that we can target, we're also deciding with new coaches who's going to be the red zone back or the guy used inside the 10-yard line. It's like Austin Eckler, how he was egregiously used under Anthony Lynn for so long. You need that touchdown equity to really uncork your ceiling. And so those are the kind of guys we're looking for. I'm glad you mentioned, we'll talk about Zamir White. Don't worry, I got some takes on him later. Okay. But I'm glad you mentioned Ramondre because I feel like I haven't gotten to draft Antonio Gibson since his rookie year. He's always been overpriced based on how Ron Rivera has treated him. But it seems like a really good bounce back situation for him, again, given an ambiguous backfield and the fact that Ramondre hasn't been a workhorse himself. And he's now in that dead zone range.
Yeah. Let's talk about some ambiguous backfields really quick because I think that, like you said, like I'm sort of saying here, these backfields, number one, these are where a lot of the league winning running backs will stem from, at least in the middle rounds. You know, my draft guide's coming out on July 1st. I've done the research on the running back position. I've done all my game theory research at this point. I'm just writing up sort of my players to target, avoid, that kind of stuff. But one of the most glaring things, has been a very glaring thing for years, is that in the middle rounds, ambiguous backfields. So I'm talking about players who, middle round running backs, which I define as RB25 to RB42. Those middle round running backs who either have a teammate in the middle rounds with them or a teammate that's being drafted a little bit ahead of them in the RB2 range, right? Where there's no ambiguity would be when there is a clear-cut RB1, so top 12 running back on a team. You know, we saw that for years and years and years in Cleveland with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Mm-hmm. And people are going to say, well, Kareem Hunt wasn't that bad. Yeah, but he was never a league-winning running back. It never happened. And largely because Nick Chubb was the RB1 on that team. And so we see decreased hit rates for these middle round running backs who do have RB1s in their team. And then we also see a decreased hit rate among these middle round running backs whose teammate RB2 is then getting drafted later. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that when you're in the middle rounds, but you're the RB1, say a Ramondre Stevenson, say a Zamir White, and your RB2 is being drafted a lot later, what does that tell you about that situation? It's probably not that great, right? If Zamir White were were projected to get a very big workload in a good offense, in a good situation where we felt good about his talent, he'd be drafted a little bit earlier. And so that's why these ambiguous backfields are so important. And I want to start with one that I'm very intrigued by. I had some discussions with Mike Leone earlier this offseason a little bit about the Tennessee backfield, just in a text, because I know that ETR, you guys work together on your rankings to sort of have some of the best rankings that you could possibly find out there. And I knew that ETR was higher on Pollard, so I was picking Leone's brain a little bit about it because I think that Spears and Pollard are kind of interchangeable. And so I want to see where you're at. We're seeing Spears inch closer and closer to Pollard in best ball drafts. They're about a round apart now. They were more like 2 to 3 rounds apart earlier, maybe even like a month ago. But I'm curious, are you firmly on team Pollard, firmly on team Spears, or are you just getting the guy who falls out of the two?
I'm literally getting both. Let me step back and say that I'm still on a quest to get our Slack conversations onto content somehow, because there are a lot of arguments that happen behind the scenes. Even on social media now, there's a meme going around where Leone says, "It's not that simple, Daigle." And that's kind of the answer to everything when we're yelling at each other, is it's not that simple, Daigle. But for me, this is a big one where we were higher on our rankings between the two. As you said, they're inching closer. But the good thing is, since we unveiled tiers for the first time ever at Establish the Run, I had a big hand in those. I wrote everything for those just because that's how I draft across sites. Yeah. With the tiers, that allows me to fudge it a little bit and then put Pollard and Spears in the same tier. Right. Thus saying, I think one or the other could easily outscore the other. And that's where I'm at right now. Spears in particular, the 6th highest target share among all running backs last year. Pollard quietly had the same usage as Travis Etienne, but no one would know since he wasn't scoring touchdowns like Etienne, who was just falling into the end zone. So at least we know, although he was efficient, Pollard was still getting the workload. And that's kind of what we're asking ourselves, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, is which one is going to get the touchdown equity usage? And I think it just could come and go, honestly, especially for this offense that I'm definitely taking shots on, given what Brian Callahan has told us throughout the offseason. The most guaranteed money sunk into a single wide receiver in free agency, drafted a left tackle to protect Will Levis's blind side at number 7 overall. Tony Pollard, like everyone forgets, although Josh Jacobs, Henry, Barkley got the big contracts, the first and second running backs on the open market to sign immediately once tampering was open was DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard. Like they were targeted, I believe, for their pass catching specialties. So I admittedly don't have a lean. Pollard's target share as well. I mentioned Spears' earlier. Pollard's has increased every season in the league. I think they're just both good at what they do. The hits are probably going to come and go, which is much tougher for season long. I understand. But honestly, I consider them interchangeable and one and the same like you.
Yeah, it's interesting too. A lot of the market trends that I'm looking at for these middle round backs suggest that second year backs are better than most other subgroups, and backs that are past their fifth year in the league are typically worse bets than backs who were in their first 5 years in the league, right? And you also want pass catchers, and technically Tajay Spears looked a little bit better from like a volume standpoint as a pass catcher last year than Pollard did, right? So there's so many things that make me lean Pollard. Like I think if you were to pick one of those two guys that could hypothetically capture the backfield, would you probably say it's Pollard of the two that would like become a true bell cow in league? Because personally, I never thought that Spears coming out as a prospect, and you can read the prospect guide from last year to see my notes about Spears. I never thought that Spears was going to be a true bell cow back. I thought he was going to be a really good complement in the league, right? And then when you look at Pollard, he was kind of that for years with Zeke, but we at least know, based on last year, a little bit before that, the year before that, we've at least seen it a little bit with Pollard, and he's a little bit bulkier than Spears would be. So I do think that hypothetically, Pollard probably has more of that bell cow upside than Spears does. But to me, I don't see a player in this backfield necessarily emerging based on talent. I see a player emerging probably more so based on injury. Would you agree with that?
Agree. If I had to pick one, it would be Pollard, not only because he's 210 pounds, so I would think that maybe the coach leans on his size, right, but also I like drafting players that have shown ceiling without the ceiling opportunity. And as you hinted on there, Pollard is 1 year removed from being the RB9 in points per game behind Ezekiel Elliott. He only averaged 13.5 touches per game 2 years ago and was still a top 12 running back. Those are the kind of guys I like, just in case they do get the lid taken off and finally allowed to run free. So I'm definitely willing to bet again on Pollard, but if Spears were the one to emerge there, it wouldn't be shocking at all.
Right. It's so weird because every argument we make for Pollard, it's like, okay, well, we could say similar things about Spears. You know what I mean? Like the efficiency, the speed that he showed last year. Like there's a lot of those like favorable things. That's why this is so difficult to me and why I've generally just gone with the cheaper guy. But even still, I've talked about this on Becoming a Best Ball Bro, where when I'm in drafts and I want that Tennessee-Jacksonville Week 17 correlation, for instance, I'm often just like getting Pollard because he's getting drafted ahead of Spears, right? And I don't want to risk not being able to get either of them. So I'm just like, okay, sure, I'll get some Pollard. So my exposure, despite the fact that I like Spears more as a value, my exposure between the two guys is actually pretty even right now.
I feel kind of bad because I faded Spears in rookie drafts last year too, just because I assumed he didn't have longevity in the league playing on one knee. But then he came out and as a rookie, and he was the same guy he was at Tulane, where he was just a yards after carry machine slipping through tackles whenever they gave him touches. So I like Spears a lot, but again, it wouldn't be shocking if either one emerges.
This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. There's no better place to play best ball than at Underdog. There are leagues starting all the time, and you can choose whether you want to do a slow draft or a fast one when entering one of those leagues. And you don't just have to play Best Ball Mania to play best ball at Underdog. There's a wide variety of contests to choose from. You can even check out Underdog's other games as well, like Pick'em. Right now, you can get in on the action with a deposit offer and free copy of the late round draft guide just by signing up and depositing. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app. When you sign up, use promo code LATEROUND and make a deposit for a deposit offer and a free copy of the late round draft guide. That guide will then be emailed to you when it launches on July 1st. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show. Let's talk about Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati's arguably even more intriguing because you have an offense that looks like it's I think that we would bet that Cincinnati's offense is going to be better than Tennessee's this year. Joe Mixon's no longer there. Obviously, Mixon's gobbled up a lot of that backfield. And then you have two running backs that are relatively questionable. You have second-year Chase Brown, who was a day 3 pick. You have Zach Moss, who's had kind of an up and down journey throughout his NFL career. Started out last year pretty strong, ended not as strong, but he had a good year in some. Yeah. What are you doing with this backfield?
I typically lean on buckets of players in these types of ambiguous situations. And I don't think a undersized day 3 back like Chase Brown is really in the bucket I'm going to be chasing, considering his ADP is relatively the same as Zach Moss. Like, at least we know Moss last year, as you hinted at, gained his coach's trust, was a workhorse back and averaging 20 carries and 3.5 targets, and the 6 starts he made for Jonathan Taylor. It was a tale of 2 seasons where only Christian McCaffrey was more explosive in his first stint as a starter. Taylor gets injured again. Moss comes back on the field. He turns into Buffalo Zach Moss. But either way, they did treat him as the main guy there. And so those are the players I typically lean on, not the day 3 guys who I think are interchangeable. So while Brown is explosive, I do have a stronger lean towards Moss in this situation.
Yeah, it feels like Moss probably has more upside again. Like, this to me seems like the upside back who could take over and be the bell cow of the two. It's not like Tennessee, where I think it's not very obvious which one hypothetically could. I think in this situation, you have the bigger bodied back. You have the better. Zach Moss was a better prospect / not a bad prospect coming out, but better prospect than Chase Brown. I don't mind throwing darts at Chase Brown. Like, I've gotten Chase Brown plenty, because I do think this is more of a best ball stance. I do think that in best ball, you could see a situation where Zach Moss is out for a game or two. Chase Brown's the bell cow just in that like short period of time, and he can be fine in that scenario. But I do think from like a season long perspective, predictability and guys that you feel comfortable throwing into your lineup every week and who's going to return some sort of point value for you, it feels like Moss is probably that guy. Now, I want to throw this at you. I saw a tweet from Pat Thorman today, which actually is it was just a joke that he was saying. It was along the lines of the Bengals backfield getting muddied when Samaje Perine joins it after he's cut by Denver. Now, it doesn't have to be specific, and this is just all obviously speculation of the Broncos backfield being hefty with tons and tons of running backs. Samaje Perine is a cut candidate, and obviously Perine has a history in Cincinnati, getting work in Cincinnati. It doesn't have to be Perine, but do you have any fear that as teams cut players and things are happening over the summer, that some player could step in and actually do more in this backfield? Because again, I feel better about the talent itself in Tennessee with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears than I do the talent in Cincinnati with Zach Moss and Chase Brown, and that brings a lot of fragility. Is there any fear that something like that could happen, whether it's Perine or not?
There is a little bit of fear, but I'm admittedly not targeting that situation as one with fear. And I do draft a little bit of Samaje Perine just in case he is cut. We're all trying to find the guy who's cut and ends up in Dallas. That's really the key here, since we don't think Daigle and Ezekiel Elliott will be the only two by week 1 in that backfield. But right now, I'm not targeting Zach Moss as if someone's coming in to take his job. I'm just assuming it's going to be only Chase Brown, just because we've seen these situations. Like last year, whenever it was Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, everyone drafted Gibbs higher, which was correct, but only because they kept on saying, well, what if Montgomery gets injured? But it works both ways. Even when Gibbs was out last year, Montgomery was the only workhorse. So it could be the same thing here with this situation. Also for Perine, it couldn't be the Bengals. It could also be anywhere else. So yeah, I haven't honestly thought about it. This is what best ball does, by the way. As you're becoming a best ball bro, you start thinking 4 levels deep into this stuff that you wouldn't even touch in season long leagues.
Yeah. Look, I thought the Thorman tweet was pretty smart though. And I was honestly, I had 5 seconds of immense fear looking at my exposure of Chase Brown and Zach Moss, thinking, man, a guy like Perine who can kind of do it all, like he's been a pass catcher and an efficient pass catcher at times. He's just a solid back. A guy like Perine could hypothetically step in and not necessarily have like amazing standalone value, but definitely hurt the other guys in that offense. And it's not like we feel amazingly great about the depth on that team / the actual starters and those 2 running backs we're talking about in Moss and Brown. So at least a thought for people to think about is, don't forget that a backfield, not many, it's not going to be like an astounding number of backfields, but what we feel right now in June can very easily be flipped and changed. And I love the connections that Thorman made with that tweet and going to Cincinnati. So I had to at least bring it up because we're talking about it. Now, speaking of Pirine, his team, Denver. A hot topic right now is Javonte Williams. It feels like the fantasy community has been talking about him a lot recently, at least from what I've seen on my timeline. How are you handling that Broncos backfield? Because you have Javonte Williams, you've got Jaleel McLaughlin, you have Audric Estime stepping up, you have Watson now stepping in and being a UDFA for them. I mean, they have a lot of running backs there, and none of them are like overly expensive in drafts right now. So are you attacking Javonte? Are you attacking Jaleel? Are you ignoring them because they have a rookie quarterback? What are you doing in that backfield?
I've been targeting Jaleel McLaughlin above all, but also because I'm a sucker for late round pass catching running backs, just because they have multiple outs to get there as we're tacking them on as our RB4s and 5. Javonte's an interesting subject because he is on the final year of his contract. He wasn't part of Sean Payton's regime that drafted him, so he could be overlooked. Also, it seems, for whatever it's worth, in June, seems like Payton has found himself another pet project in Blake Watson, undrafted free agent at running back 2. Audric Estime had averaged a 5% target share his last 2 years at Notre Dame, so he's not going to be a guy who steps in, we don't think, and earns that pass catching role. So I still would take McLaughlin, understanding that most likely he's not going to be a workhorse. That's not what I'm really going for here. I'm looking for 10 to 15 touches, right in that range, if that. Maybe some injury spot starts for him, but I still love McLaughlin, if only because maybe I'd love to get your take on this, because I'm not sure if it was the offense or Jaleel's talent. I think it could be a little bit of both. But like everyone now knows, like you can walk in any room, you can walk in any bar, and everyone will tell you Sean Payton's offense led the league in running back target rate. We're all aware. But McLaughlin, though, actually led his position of any running back with at least 10 targets. There were a lot of them. He led his position in target per route run rate, 27%. Yeah. It's a lot. Maybe that was his specific pass catching role. Maybe it's because he was really good. Like he's the poor man's Austin Eckler, where he's just slippery anytime you get him the ball. So I like his talent. I like his role within the offense and thinking it could expand. Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think McLaughlin's been a nice get sort of all offseason, in these best ball drafts. And I think his dynasty price has been attractive as well. I mean, he was, in some of my dynasty leagues that don't have any sort of transactions in season, and so you just kind of wait until rookie drafts happen. And so any out of nowhere player like McLaughlin was last year is then in that rookie draft pool, and he was in some of them because no one was picking him up at the beginning of last year, right? We were waiting to see sort of what that would look like, and so I was able to even get him in rookie drafts this year because of that. And he was going way later than I ever expected him to go in those drafts. But regardless, I mean, I think that what's interesting is Estime to me is sort of the insurance for Javonte, which is, this is the last year of his contract, as you noted. Estime, not a pass catcher, was never a pass catcher at Notre Dame, didn't have a good profile there, but definitely a bigger bodied guy. He's younger too. There's some stuff to like with Estime's overall profile, but I think he's sort of the one-to-one with Javonte, if you will. I think Javonte's a better pass catcher, but if you were to say this is the archetype, I think that would be Estime to Javonte, and then Blake Watson would be that to Jaleel McLaughlin. Now, the question is, does Denver hold 4 running backs and keep 4 running backs on that roster when it's all said and done? I think that they might, honestly. I really, if they like Watson enough, I wouldn't be shocked if they keep 4, but, game time happens, they're probably dressing 3, and in my opinion, Watson would be sort of the odd man out in that scenario as a UDFA, as long as you like what you see in Jaleel McLaughlin. And if that's the case, McLaughlin as an archetype has less competition in that backfield than the other 2 guys do, because the other 2 guys are sort of that same early down kind of archetype. So at the end of the day, I think that we're looking at probably a split backfield. But my question to you, though, is also, going back to what we were talking about with like Tennessee and Cincinnati, of all of these players, would you agree that if there's a player that just ends up emerging, it's Javonte Williams? Like if there's a player who is just a bell cow, like the league winning player, it would be Javonte and not someone like Jaleel McLaughlin.
Yes, which is why I still tack him on as an RB2 if I start with one in the first couple of rounds. But relative to the field, and maybe just because of McLaughlin, I know for a fact I'm going to close in week 1 underweight compared to the field on Javonte.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair because I do think that, we want these ambiguous backfields. This actually isn't as ambiguous because these guys are going later. And again, to reiterate what I said earlier, that signals to us that maybe the situation itself might not be as good. But I do think when you look at Javonte and the Denver situation, Denver, Sean Payton and the way that he's deployed running backs in the past, it's usually not a bell cow scenario. It's usually a tandem in some way. Even if you want to look at Alvin Kamara with him in New Orleans, Kamara has always had somewhat of a split backfield. While he's been in New Orleans, he's just been the pass catcher, which is a lot more valuable. And then look at, the teams that Peyton had with like a Pierre Thomas and such, and Darren Sproles and all of those names from like the late, 2010 or the early 2010s range, and what do you call it? The late OOs, the late.
Isn't it the aughts?
Is that what they call it?
I thought it's the aughts.
Someone's going to fact check us and hit us up in the comments for that.
Please do, but I think it's the aughts. I could be wrong, though.
Yeah, whatever. Like the time frame of like 06 to 2010, like around then, whenever Peyton first got to...
It's called the Blink-182 era, is what it's called.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, like, he's always had split backfields to some degree. I don't know if this is the backfield where a guy would emerge, whereas like in Cincinnati, I feel like a guy could emerge because we have evidence of that team giving a lot of work to Joe Mixon historically, whereas we just don't have that with Sean Payton as much.
It's also the way we frame it, because I feel like everyone is still looking for their 17-game starter. When I talk about Jaleel McLaughlin, I'm talking about a 14th round pass catching back who legitimately, I want 2 to 4 spot starts and a couple hits. That's it. Like, if I get that, I feel like I'm so comfortable with that, because that's not the game of fantasy. The fantasy football game is pockets. Like, unless you're Christian McCaffrey, we just need you in pockets, and we're trying to find those pockets.
Yeah, and it's okay even in season long with a McLaughlin type player who you get as an RB4. He's sitting on your bench. Maybe you have an injury a week a week or two in or something like that, and you just need a semi high floor PPR back. It's okay to throw him in your RB2 spot. Like, you're not like, I do get a little bit irritated, and this is kind of a tangent. I do get a little bit irritated when fantasy analysts are like, and I've been guilty of it at times too, but they're like, what's that guy really doing for your team? What's Jaleel McLaughlin really going to bring to the table in your lineup? Because, the most PPR points per game that he's going to, like, a realistic 17 game PPR points per game rate for Jaleel McLaughlin is probably like 12 to 14 max. Like, realistically, like, if we're being genuine about it. But number one, I think that there are instances where we could see those spiked weeks where he could break it. Why can't he break a big run or break a big pass that he catches and just take it 80 yards to the house? And all of a sudden, okay, he's a top 15 running back, top 10 running back that week only because of that one play. But also, from a predictability standpoint, when you're actually managing your roster week in and week out, having a high floor option that could still break one of those big plays, to me, is okay when you're getting him in the freaking 14th round.
Especially because that's when we're trying to find the ceiling players. The opposite end of that spectrum that I still think is fine for pockets, that is falling in home league ADP, at least right now, is James Conner, where I'm not looking for a 17-game starter, but I can absolutely plug James Conner in. A running back who had 5 consecutive top 12 finishes before he got injured last year. I can be high on him and Trey Benson. I'm okay with both of them.
Yeah. Let's talk about Pittsburgh real quick, and then we're going to move on to some other positions. But Pittsburgh, Arthur Smith there, Russell Wilson looking like the probable starter at least week 1. I think there's been a lot of hope with Justin Fields more than anything else by the fantasy community that he ends up starting and playing a lot. I haven't really bought into that. Like, I think Russ actually works decently well within this offense, or could hypothetically work in this offense, not to be like a fantasy stud, but to at least be a competent quarterback for Arthur Smith and what the Steelers want to do, which is run the ball a lot of play action, a lot of down the field passes. But with that running the ball a lot, we're going to see 2 things happen. We're going to see a lot of running back touches on the ground, but we also have a history of potentially seeing a lot of targets going to these 2 guys, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. Is there a player of the 2 that you strongly prefer, or is this more so sort of how you're viewing Tennessee? Maybe I should ask you, is this a Cincinnati situation for you, where you're favoring Zach Moss, or is this a Tennessee situation for you where you could really go either way?
I thought I would be more in on Jaylen Warren, but honestly, again, going back to flattening my exposures in best ball, And season long, I think there will be a wide margin, like probably 2 or 3 rounds between Najee and Jaylen Warren. Yeah. But in best ball right now, they literally go back to back. You have your pick on the clock every single time. And so I'm just differentiating between the two. We know Arthur Smith is going to come in and give RB touches, and that's for an offense that already combined for over 500 RB touches between Najee and Jaylen Warren last year. But even on the limited game, Warren's role did expand post-bye, but even like on his limited touches, he was awesome. 12th in success rate among every running back to have at least 100 carries. I still think Najee will get, as we talked about earlier, that touchdown equity, the inside the 10 role, just for being the bigger back with a higher draft capital. But I still want pieces of both since Warren is so explosive. So I don't lean either way. I think I'm going to come out slightly more overweight on Warren, but I do admittedly still take Najee as my RB2 at times.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised from my perspective, because I think what you said is completely correct. And I just did a mock draft right before we started recording this.
It's so boring, though, to say, because I know everyone wants like the hot take, and it's like, I don't know, man, I take both. Literally, I take both.
Yeah, no, but I think what you said about the difference in sort of circling back to what we talked about at the start of the show, the difference between best ball and season long. I just did a mock draft before we started recording this, and I got Jaylen Warren, I think, like 2 or 3 rounds after where Najee Harris was drafted, right? And you're not going to see that gap nearly as great on Underdog in these best ball drafts. You'll see Jaylen Warren go ahead of Najee at times, right? And my exposure as a result has actually been greater on the Najee side so far than the Warren side, because the gap is just non-existent over there on Underdog. Whereas I think my exposure will be a lot stronger in season long and managed leagues with Jaylen Warren, who I do think probably has a little bit better pass catching upside than Harris does, because of the lower cost, right? If he's going to go 2 or 3 rounds later than Najee Harris, and maybe I would prefer Harris 60% of the time, it's not that dramatic, then I'm going to get Warren at the decreased price in season long and maybe just lean Najee. When I say lean, I'm probably at like 12% exposure to 10% exposure. It's not like a dramatic difference, but I do think that could be the way that people just generally
have become a true best ball bro, noting your 12%, 10% exposures.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it. I definitely peep my exposures probably once every couple of days.
It is fun though. Like you and I doing this, and there are several others who write for home leagues as well as like higher stakes. But I think our off season, which there is no off season anymore, but I think the season now is segmented proportionally throughout the year, because like by the time I get tired of talking about exposures and like ambiguous backfields and player takes, then the Wild West of home leagues comes in.
Yeah.
And it's just a totally different scene out there. It's a Cormac McCarthy post-apocalyptic world where yes, like Zamir White's a 3rd, 4th round pick, and it just writes itself basically from all the work we've done before. But that is a huge difference, is noting the home league from the best ball stuff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, and maybe this is a teaser / way to promote my draft guide a little bit, but even looking at like Fantasy Pros rankings right now, which are season-long based, it's not best ball based, I find myself disagreeing with a lot. And I don't feel that way most seasons. Maybe it's because I've been best ball broing it harder this year than in previous seasons, and so I'm really in tune with ADP and where guys generally go. But I do feel like this could be one of those years where I'm just disagreeing with other analysts or, other advice that people are hearing, more than what I typically do, which is really fun and should make more entertaining content. But I do wonder how much of that is being influenced by what's going on in best ball and how that's going to then transfer over to season long.
Well, come join the ETR Slack where I keep yelling at Levitin the Jets won't win 10.5 games. Yeah, we got all the fights you won over there.
There you go. Let's move on to quarterback really quick, because right now in drafts, what I'm noticing is, you get these like elite rushers and these elite mobile guys that you can get early-ish. Yeah. I shouldn't say early as in like first couple rounds, but like, in best ball, it's like late 3 into round 6. And then, you get a pocket of pocket passers, maybe Kyler Murray aside, and then you get to these late round quarterbacks where there doesn't seem to be, maybe we could throw Jaden Daniels in here, but definitely not an Underdog because he goes earlier in Underdog. But you can shout out Jaden Daniels, it's fine. But there just doesn't seem to be an obvious go-to late round quarterback this season, whereas it feels like we've had some in the past, and almost every single year. But this year, it seems like the market's just really, really efficient at quarterback. So my question is, are there any late round quarterbacks this year that you're sort of buying into more than the market is?
That I'm buying into? Probably not, but that I'm drafting? Sure, there are a couple. The obvious one is Will Levis, just for all the reasons I mentioned, taking a shot on an offense I believe will be literally an entirely different universe from what they've been with Derrick Henry under Brian Callahan now. So I think it's worth taking that chance. And then the other one that I think people are somewhat catching on to, but there's a real chance Bo Nix is a 17-game starter. I don't know what kind of upside, if any, the Broncos offense has, honestly. But I learned my lesson from Justin Herbert not to overevaluate quarterbacks coming in, especially ones like Nix and Herbert, who were above-average athletes who were forced to engineer their offense. And Bo Nix, I believe that's why he had the third most screen passes of last year, was because he was just engineering the Oregon Ducks offense. Not only that, but Jackson Powers Johnson, their starting center, got drafted on night one. Beyond that, they didn't have another player, Bucky Irving, Troy Franklin. They didn't have another player go until round 3 or day 3. So I assume that Nix is the reason why the Oregon offense was so potent. Given that he could, again, start 17 games, all he has to do is beat out Jared Stidham. I do like Bo Nix. I don't know about 2 QB builds. That may be too fragile for me, but absolutely in 3 quarterback builds, start with Jamar Chase, round it out with some late Broncos like Troy Franklin and Nix to get the week 17 correlation. I've been doing that quite a bit.
Yeah. Do you have any love for well, I've a two-parter. Any love for Drake May, number one, but number two, is there any fear with both the May and the JJ McCarthy situations with Sam Darnold and Jacoby Brissett and those quarterbacks, stealing a lot of the, playing 10 games this year, or playing at least the front half of the season, and those 2 quarterbacks that not getting that much love? Is there a lean that you would go in a certain way of how many games those rookie quarterbacks would play? And then number 2, as sort of like an addition to that, are you attacking or approaching and drafting either of those 2 rookie quarterbacks?
I'm always attacking late round rushing quarterbacks, which you've pretty much built your brand on. And Drake May, 9.4 rushing points per game as a 2-year starter with the Tar Heels. So of course I'm tacking him on. Yeah. But when he and JJ McCarthy start, are entirely different conversations. I've tried to parse the Patriots schedule, and there's honestly no open window. Like for Will Levis, it was so obvious when they were going to transition from the bye for the Titans. But for the Patriots, they have an early first month game in London where they come back, but it's not even a long week afterwards, since teams get to pick when they play next after. So I just don't know when they would transition to May, and I would bet everything that it's Jacoby Brissett who starts week 1. So I'm giving Brissett like a month and a half bumper before we see May. Having said that, I still don't mind as a rushing quarterback taking him late. JJ McCarthy, not as a player, as a prospect, but in fantasy as a rookie, I'm a little more bearish on, just because I don't think we'll get the rushing upside. Not only that, I don't know what the offense entails in Minnesota. Like you and I, a couple others do a lot of team regression work. I can't even do player takes until I do team regression stuff. Right. And that's always when everyone comes out the gate hot and starts yelling. It's like, how did you even get there yet? I need to figure out the projections first. But for Minnesota, they 80% of their touchdowns came through the air last year, and the last 20 teams to score 80% of their touchdowns through the air over the last decade, only one of them replicated that production. So we just don't think they're going to be as potent through the air either, despite having, a first-round player in Justin Jefferson. So I'm a little more bearish on Vikings offense than I think a lot of people are.
Yeah, I like that call out a lot. Tight end is kind of similar to quarterback, where you have this pocket of, let's not call them elite. We had a whole discussion about this on Becoming a Best Ball Bro. Hayden Winks talked about it this past week on Twitter about calling them elite or not elite, and him saying that they're not really elite because they're not going in like the first couple rounds. But regardless, you have this pocket of really good tight ends. Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Sam Laporta. Maybe you want to throw Kincaid and Kyle Pitts in there. And then, or even George Kittle. And then you get kind of these like stable, Jake Ferguson, Evan Ingram types where they're probably going to see at least a lot of volume. And then you get into like Brock Bowers, who at least has the upside. And then it's just no man's land. I mean, it is rough out there at tight end, more so I feel like than previous seasons. So my question to you, are there any late round tight ends that you're into?
Again, N2 is one thing, drafting is another. Quick side note for home league difference, again, Kyle Pitts is going to be a guy where your league is tired of. They're just done with it.
Yeah,
and like, this is the time of the year, like finally we can get back on Pitts because everything is following along the Zach Robinson blueprint. We know they're going to run a heavy dose of 3 wide sets and pass the ball more. Every player is going along. Bijan Robinson, Drake London. Kyle Pitts is not. Kyle Pitts is now being left for dead, like as the tight end 8 or 9 in some cases. So it's a great year to get back on Pitts. I'm very excited for that. But for late round, for me, it's always about finding guys who are going to run routes, and ideally, they're athletes with with all the opportunity, no competition. Last year, that got me on Hunter Henry, who faded, but again, in pockets, Hunter Henry delivered tight end 1 overall weeks. He was a spike week guy. Same for Cade Otton, who was being left for dead last round, and we just assumed he had no competition unless you considered Keeft an NFL player. But for this year, I think those guys, could be wrong, but I think those guys are Noah Fant, who, like Antonio Gibson's younger than Ramondre Stevenson. Noah Fant has just been in the league so long, we forget he's only 26 years old.
It's crazy.
Hyper athlete with Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly on other teams now. So I like Noah Fant. And then also, I don't mean to continue betting on the Titans, but they go so late that going back to athletes, I know Chig Okonkwo has been the tight end 26 and tight end 27. The peripherals don't even look good, honestly, either, the last 2 seasons. But I don't think he has competition, and it's an entirely different pass-first offense. So I don't mind betting on Chig either.
Yeah, I like those 2 calls. I also want to shout out Jonnu Smith, too, who I think is interesting, just given the fact that, there's not that much else going on there. And I think that, a guy like McDaniel being able to scheme out a yak tight end like him could be pretty intriguing in that offense.
And Goddard are the ones I'm having a hard time parsing just because their offenses are so condensed. Right. But also Goddard was always banged up last year. Jonnu hasn't proven it over a full season, but it does seem like, given his athleticism underneath, in Jonnu's case, like I do think he can take away like even 8 to 10% is a lot from that offense, and it probably impacts Waddle more than anything.
Yeah, and not to say that Waddle and Tyreek aren't yak players, because they absolutely are. I mean, Tyreek especially is, but they also can get very, very vertical. And we've seen that at times a little bit, I guess, with Jonnu. But I think that if you think of them, of what they can do schematically, stretching the field with their wideouts, doing a lot of crazy things in the backfield with the speed that they have, and letting Jonnu get some cheap targets and, have a lower ADOT, but do a lot with that ADOT, I think is very, very possible, especially, there were even times last year where like Durham Smythe was running a ton of routes. He just wasn't being targeted that frequently. We could say it's because Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are on the team, but we could also say because it's Durham Smythe. It's like Jonnu Smith isn't like that bad of a tight end. Like he's definitely a capable guy. So he's one. I just want to throw that out there. I think he's one that's kind of intriguing too.
Only knew the amount of times I took min-priced Durham Smythe in DFS or in redraft leagues when your tight end gets injured, you're running to the waiver wire to pick one up Sunday morning. How many times I laid that egg with Durham Smythe? It was so frustrating.
We talked about Durham Smythe probably 6 times last year on Living the Stream. I mean, he was like a staple of the show.
Diddy Player of the Year. Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right, before I let you go, let's talk about 2 players that you're targeting this year. Could be guys we talked about already. 2 players that you're avoiding this year.
Let's start with the positives, I guess. Okay. Let's go on a bad note. No one ever does that. So Patrick Mahomes, I know it sounds crazy because everyone knows who he is, but I think we finally have a chance to buy Apple stock low because Mahomes, in my opinion, is due for regression following a career low touchdown rate, a career low 17.5 fantasy points per game. Previously, he had an average less than 20. Kansas City's lowest rate of touchdown drives since he's been under center since 2017. And it was also the first time an Andy Reid offense passed for fewer than 30 touchdowns since Alex Smith was under center. You couple all of that with L'Jarius Sneed's absence. Like, Sneed is the reason why they were legitimately a top 3 offense when he was on the field. I think we could get some more shootouts, and I think we get regression through the air. So it's a good time to buy low on Patrick Mahomes ahead of CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson. If he goes ahead of Lamar Jackson, I don't do it all the time, but I totally get it, especially if you're talking about Underdog, where all you need to do is draft Travis Kelce and you box out everyone else because Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy go a couple rounds late enough to where Mahomes will fall 2 or 3 rounds just because everyone is so infatuated, and rightfully so, infatuated with stacking over there. So I love bouncing back with like Mahomes onslaughts right now. I'm also in on Devon Achane because a lot of like my reasoning for Josh Jacobs, who I'll talk about in a second, but I don't draft Josh Jacobs because if you're making the contractual argument for running back a workhorse, you can just wait and then you can get a Joe Mixon or someone else in that range. We talked about some others along the way. Devon Achane is kind of like waiting on Jahmyr Gibbs, like not using the number 12 overall in Gibbs and just waiting to the second, third round turn for a player who breaks the game of fantasy football. Like Achane only played 9 games and he finished with 23 carries of 10 plus yards. James Cook, for reference, finished second to Christian McCaffrey on the entire year with 33 carries of 10 yards, just 10 more. So Achane, regardless if he gets more work or not, and I'm not sure if he does. I believe he will. I'm not sure. He's already shown he wins your leagues at his current role. And again, I target guys later on who perhaps can grow into a larger role, but have already shown the ceiling. So those are my 2 positives. I'm the host now. Any thoughts?
I agree. The Achane thing, when I first built projections in April, I looked at Achane, I'm like, oh man, he looks like RB16 or something like that, right? In projections, like he didn't look as strong. And then I started to buy into him more and more. And then I had a conversation with Pat Kerrane about him. And it really made me realize how obvious of a pick he is. Where, the downside is he probably has a similar role as last year. And we saw what he did in that role. The upside is, what if he sees more work? And if he sees... Now, look, he's going to regress from an efficiency standpoint more than likely. I don't think that we should expect him to have by far the best yards per carry rate of any 100-plus carry back once again. But I do think that you have to buy into that upside. People are afraid of, the downside of workload, but I just have a hard time, even with the Jalen Wright pick. To me, the Jalen Wright pick was, hey, Raheem Mostert is 32 years old and he's been often injured, as Devon Achane was last year. So we need a little bit of insurance / I think Jalen Wright is more of a Raheem Mostert type as opposed to what they want to do with Devon Achane, right? Like I think Jalen Wright is a bigger threat. This is why the market is doing what it's doing with Mostert over on Underdog, is because the market understands that Jalen Wright more than likely is going to dig more into Mostert's role than Achane's role versus what Mostert did last year, right? So I like that call of Achane quite a bit.
When everyone mentions the regression for Achane, that's when I usually follow up with saying, what about the regression for Mostert, since that was the most points per game for a running back age 31 or older since Tiki Barber in 2006. Like it literally just doesn't happen ever. So why would I ever bet on that?
Yeah. I mean, he played like 8 touchdowns over expected last year.
Correct.
So I mean,
career high touchdowns in his 9th season.
Yeah,
wow.
Right. I mean, it's just hard to bet on that kind of archetype. And then with Mahomes, last year was the first time that they had by far their lowest touchdown total as an offense. And to simply say like, oh, this is the way it's going to be for the Chiefs moving forward, I think is just silly, because it's the greatest quarterback talent that we've arguably ever seen. And they add Xavier Worthy, they add Hollywood Brown, hopefully Rashee Rice, just from a football standpoint, is able to play, a decent number of games. Even if he doesn't, they're going to be able to stretch the field a little bit more. And they've even talked about that already. Like, I think Mahomes, we're just going to see the standard Mahomes season, the bounce back, if you will. And like you said, if you want to take him over a Lamar in certain builds, I think it's logical and reasonable.
Mahomes in the last 3 seasons has outscored in points per game Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson at some time. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. He's already showed without the rushing floor, he still gets it done. Yeah. Like my big stands this year will be, I don't know if CJ Stroud has that in his bag. Like where CJ Stroud's being drafted, he has to win MVP to pay that off. And he can. Right. He's amazing. But like CJ Stroud's my QB6, and that's frowned upon heavily because everyone's taking him over Mahomes. And I think that's a pretty egregious call.
Yeah. Let's talk about your avoids.
Yeah, for 2 negatives. Josh Jacobs, let's start there. I think it's a pretty easy one because RB18 in points per game last year, but we saw it coming from a mile away as a first-round pick in home leagues. An incorrect one, given that the 4 other backs before him over the last decade to have at least 390 touches, they just wear it on their bones the next time they play. None of them, Le'Veon Bell, Christian McCaffrey, none of them reached 315 touches, same as Josh Jacobs. And everyone's just assuming now, 2 years removed from the injury, he'll be fine. He'll be good to go. But that one standalone year, it was his only season so far through 5 that he's finished as a top 12 running back in per week production. Like that was an anomaly season if that's the case.
Right.
Not only that, But it's just the fact that given Green Bay, what's already coming out of training camp, like, I'm not sure he's the workhorse anyhow. They showed us last year they don't mind sprinkling in other guys. Perhaps Marshawn Lloyd is that player this year. So I'm pretty low on Josh Jacobs given where he's going.
Yeah, I like that call. I've been talking about this with Jacobs all offseason, basically when he signed with Green Bay, where I just don't understand the market's allure and love for him. Matt LaFleur has a history of splitting backfields dating back to his time in Tennessee with Derrick Henry and Dion Lewis. Now, I've heard the rebuttal to that, saying that this was before Derrick Henry became Derrick Henry, which is totally fair. But even when Derrick Henry finally sort of broke out and started to play well during the second half of that season where he was splitting the backfield with Dion Lewis, it took Tennessee like a month and a half to finally give Derrick Henry that backfield during the final week or final 3 weeks of the season, during the fantasy playoffs when he really went off. We've seen it with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. And we've seen it. We've heard it from Matt LaFleur himself that he wants split backfields. He doesn't want to give a guy everything. And so that's why they spent a day 2 pick, in my opinion, on Marshawn Lloyd, because this is the way that they operate their offense. Despite the fact that they had already gotten AJ Dillon back on that roster, they still spent that pick to get Marshawn Lloyd. So I found it interesting that people are still drafting Jacobs where they're drafting him. Like the Jacobs versus, even in the same tier, the guys who sort of get drafted around him, like the Jacobs versus Pacheco versus Rashad White and Joe Mixon and such, to your point earlier, Jacobs, his cost has fallen on Underdog over the last month, but you know, he was going at like the 3-4 turn pretty frequently when you could get a Joe Mixon type in the 6th. And it's like, what's the difference between these two players? Like, legitimately, like, why are we so much more? Is it the offense? Because I don't think it's the offense, right? Like, you could easily argue that Houston's offense is going to be better than, you probably should, better than Green Bay's this year, or Pacheco in Kansas City. That's an offense that I probably like more than Green Bay's as well. Like, I can't really pinpoint the argument for Jacobs aside from, I think he's going to be the bell cow, which is fine, but I just don't think that's enough.
I mean, how many times did that let us down the right path? Maybe one time ever. Also, to your point on Derrick Henry, that career high in touches season, he averaged 5.4 yards per carry. He hasn't come close to 5 yards per carry since. The study of running backs to have 390 plus touches over the last 10 years, they have averaged collectively minus 0.6, so over half a yard less yards per touch. Like, they basically just lose their efficiency again, because I think they go the path of Le'Veon Bell, DeMarco Murray, where it just ends their lives.
Right. Do you have one more avoid?
The final one, which I think is going to be, it's not so bad for best ball, even though I never take him, but for home leagues, we're going to have to get the message out there that if you took Alexander Mattison in the 6th round last year, then you need to know Zamir White is right here wearing his Alexander Madison t-shirt.
On a team with Alexander Madison.
Oddly enough, that's the best in best ball, because I'm taking Alexander Madison in the 18th round. It's like, whatever in the 6th round last year, now he's in the same position that Ty Chandler was in last season. But in short, for Zamir White, going in home leagues, he's going to go in the 4th to 6th round. And this is just not a bucket of player we want to target. Maxed out at 169 touches across 3 seasons at Georgia. He's only earned 136 total touches through 2 NFL seasons. And more importantly, in that 5-game stretch where he was the bell cow over the last month of the season that everyone is drafting him for highly now, he ran just 17 more routes than Amir Abdullah, still on the team, still the 3rd down back. Alexander Madison also there, as you mentioned, with $7 million guaranteed, I believe it was. So Zamir White's just going to be one of the easiest fades in home leagues.
Yeah, I've been fading him too. Obviously anything is possible, but I do think, I mean, you're right. We talked about the probability side earlier.
I also just get into character. I'm like, I'm never going to take this player ever, no matter who is available, even in the Zamir White only league.
Yeah. I think I've done a lot of drafts on Underdog, 300, 400 drafts on Underdog. I think I've taken him 4 times. So if he's a league winner, then I'm screwed. But I do think that this is the process. This is the logical thing to do when you are drafting a player that's based on projected volume and you can't lean on talent with that player. Look, if you believe Zamir White is a really, really good running back, then sure, draft him. Like if you think that he's a potential stud as a player, as a talent, sure. go after him. But I think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that might not be the case. And at the very least, if you think that he's an early down back, which I do think is fine, I don't know if he has the pass catching chops, because every destination since college, because he played with James Cook a little bit at Georgia. Hopefully I'm recalling that properly. But he plays college, is not the pass catcher there. Then he goes to the Raiders, where obviously Josh Jacobs was there. But even last year down the stretch, his target share per game rate was still under 10%. And you need that 10% mark, essentially, unless you're Derek freaking Henry, to be a very viable RB1 option. And this is an area of the draft. This is not Jaleel McLaughlin 14th round, where it's okay if McLaughlin's like a low end RB2 or a high end RB3 and you're profiting off of it. If you're drafting an RB2 or a low end RB2 even, you want RB1 upside. I just don't know if that RB1 upside is there for Zamir White.
Which is also why it's a round or two earlier, and we didn't even really touch on it. I know you've probably talked about it or written about it, but I am on the whiplash. I'm back on the return of elite quarterback, just because the way the trends happened last year, it didn't seem like it was proper to draft quarterbacks chasing historical results in the second round. But now those league winning guys have fallen to the fourth and fifth round, Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. And if that's the case, we're talking about like fringe territory where someone like Zamir White, T. Higgins, George Pickens, Travis Etienne are going. And like, if that's the case, why would I ever take anyone like that over Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's a season-long choice you're going to have to make this year.
Absolutely.
Are you going to get? I mean, maybe at the very least, you're probably going to have to make the decision with the elite tight ends, right? The higher end tight ends, because people love quarterbacks in season-long leagues. So maybe we'll see a Josh Allen in a lot of leagues go in like the early second or something like that. But the tight end situation, those tight ends are going later than the upper part of the tight end position is going later than we've seen basically over the last decade. Like we haven't seen this much ambiguity at tight end. So your opportunity cost, that's the other thing with the running back dead zone this year, is number one, like I said in the late round podcast episode, that dead zone exists in every draft. It's just the opportunity cost equation that changes, right? The mid to low end RB2s, they exist in every draft. It's just that it's easier to take those guys on when they're 8th round picks as opposed to 3rd round picks, right? But now when they are 3rd to 5th round picks, that opportunity cost isn't just the wide receivers that you're drafting there, which has typically been the case. Now you get like really good quarterbacks and really good tight ends that actually do matter when they haven't mattered as much historically, right? Because in the past it was, okay, we're waiting on quarterback, or we're getting an elite tight end, or we're just waiting on tight end, right? So quarterback wasn't even part of our discussion in the early rounds, even in that round 4, round 5 range. Tight end, you really shouldn't have been worrying about them either, because Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce were going in the 1st and 2nd round, and even Mark Andrews in the 2nd. And then it was really just the wide receivers that you were worried about in the running back dead zone from an opportunity cost standpoint. Now it's quarterback, tight end, and wide receiver. It's all 3 of the positions that really matter. It's just another reason why, if these guys really do rise and go in that area of the draft in your season-long leagues, which I think we both expect, it's just another reason why they're bad bets. It's
reminiscent of just 2 years ago, whenever, never forget, Jalen Hurts was being drafted right next to Chase Edmonds, and people were actually debating. It's like, what one breaks the game of fantasy football, the other maybe a top 10 option, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so true.
Just remember, everyone drafts last year's results. The first step in any research, everyone drafts last year.
Yes, there's a very, very common theme throughout this year's draft guide about the market being reactive. And we're seeing that happen a lot at the tight end position in particular this year at the top, which I think is going to be really interesting. And we're also seeing it with wide receivers and running backs a bit, where you could make the argument that you want to zig when others zag with wide receivers. The difference is the running back position kind of sucks just in general. Like, there's not like if there were like 12 running backs that I felt really, really good about, right? I only feel really, really good about maybe 3 or 4 of them, right? Because you get, and I'll throw even like Achane in there as saying I feel really good about him at cost at least, right? Whereas Jonathan Taylor, you can make the argument of the mobile quarterback, maybe not as much touchdown equity and not as much receiving work. Same exact argument against Saquon Barkley. Kyron Williams, you get Blake Corum, and you might see a decreased workload there. Derrick Henry's older. Like, you go down the list and there are red flags for every. I wish that wasn't the case, because if that wasn't the case, it would be a very easy year to zig while others zag and start RB. But the problem is we just don't have many running backs that you feel that confident about.
And even in my Achane or Kyron RB start in the first 3 rounds with like a first round running back, even then, like you just said, I'll tell you like the downside of Kyron and Achane. It's pretty simple, but I'll still do it just because like once Derrick Henry's off the board, my brain literally shuts off. I do not click the RB tab at all until we get to like Ty Chandler. It's like, okay, now I can start tacking on these guys who may have a ceiling. Yeah,
exactly. Daigle, man, it was great chatting with you as usual. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that good stuff.
EstablishToRun.com. You may have heard of it. Just had a phone call with Evan Silva that you also may have heard of. And we just decided like how we're going to begin rolling out the draft kit package for everyone, splitting team previews, positional tiers, expanding his top 150 this year, plus a lot more. So excited to get working on that in the coming weeks. And by July, that'll be rolling out for everyone.
And I will actually be having another ETR member on Becoming a Best Ball Bro next week in Mr. Mike Leone. So that'll yeah, I know. Two of my pals, though. I mean, I love everyone at ETR, but 2 of my pals, back-to-back shows. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. I'm like, it's hilarious that my job is to sit on a podcast and talk to my friends. Like at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're just talking ball with buddies.
The girlfriend's family or mom and family, extended family from Louisiana are visiting here in Chicago. And I tell them I have a show and they're like, should we leave the house? Like, do we need to be quiet? I was like, you don't understand what I do, which to be fair, I don't understand. I don't know how we're getting paid for this. I don't know how this is a job. So I am very lucky. Thanks to everyone listening. And just remind Leone that sometimes it is that simple.
Okay, I will do that. As usual, you can pre-order the draft guide over on lateround.com, and make sure you sign up over on Underdog, promo code LateRound. If you don't want to buy the draft guide and you haven't signed up on Underdog, make a deposit, use promo code LateRound. You will get a free draft guide emailed to your email inbox on July 1st when that launches. So check that out, underdogfantasy.com, promo code LateRound. Otherwise, everyone, thank you for tuning in.